Hey, Terrence.
Hey, do you want to get your vent out of the way first?
No, I'm just pretty pissed off. I think it's complete bullshit. And the idea that I have to prove 100% is moronic. I mean, it's frankly moronic. If you think that a debate is where one side has to prove 100%, the other person just take a little pinhole and poke just a little tiny hole, and the con wins, you're an idiot. It goes to Daniel, who's really pissing me off, but for many more things. I've listened to him. He's just an idiot. And my opponent, 12,000 hours, and you really think that that's a... So I was just watching the judges, and their entire view. They said my opponent had no argument, but he wins because the statement said must. I was like, that's not what must means. So you must vote for me. There, I win because you have to. You're compelled to. You have no choice. You must vote for me, everybody. So no, I'm just, and you know what? I don't even like this call out. I don't even care about winning, but it's a tournament, so it is something where winning is really what matters. It's usually call outs from, obviously, debating is not about winning, because I think you and I both take sides that are very unpopular.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
Okay, so yeah, that's good. That's why I wanted to open. It's like rather than waste some of my 20 minutes, I get to spend our 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Socialized cost.
Yes, exactly. Socialized cost. Okay, so
all right, let's get into it. Yeah.
No, before we get into it, I'll just say, hey, the funny thing is when I was talking to Daniel, is that he automatically said that I was taking your side because it was because we're both like Christians and stuff like that. But I try to explain it has nothing to do with the Christian thing. It has to do with the debate and how I view the debate. But yeah.
But if somebody does that, look, if you're going to take my side because you're a Christian, he's an anti-Christian, so he's obviously going to take the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy I debated was supposedly a Christian, but he denied the resurrection. So, it's questionable, right? So, why debate? I think debating is not about just I can't just take any side. Like, I'm not going to debate you on whether Christianity is true or not, just for fun.
Yep.
So
exactly. But okay, all right. Okay. So we're ready to kick this off. So it's at 42 minutes right now. So probably anybody who was watching our debate has probably already turned it off. It's like,
oh, that was entertaining though, right?
Yeah. Okay, so going back to this debate, the topic of this debate: those who protest to keep up Civil War statues for heritage's sake, one, have an unrealistic view of history, and two, have never really looked at the situation objectively. Now, first, let me say, when I'm talking about those who protest, I'm not just talking about people who are standing outside with picket signs, but just most people who protest, no matter how you protest. Because now, after the last debate, I feel like we have every debate I have to explain exactly what I mean now before somebody takes it the wrong way. But okay, so the justification of not wanting to remove signs of the Confederacy due to remembering our history is crazy to me. And that's because schools, colleges, parents, historians, those are the people that's responsible for teaching history, not statues who don't tell the full story of these men who are being made into monuments. The context of these people are never really looked at. Some of these men were psychopaths. Their most famous thing was probably slaughtering and killing other Americans. But that part is never said. It's just a statue in the middle of some town somewhere. We commemorate these men in our cities with these monuments, even though, like I said, probably the best thing or the most famous thing they ever did was actually killing other Americans. So in that way, it takes the history of it out of context. And then the people that say this is taken away from our heritage, and I always want to say, what heritage? What exactly is this heritage that they're taking away from? I'm not sure, because, like, for example, to me, this is not about you have your far left and your far right who will tell you this has to do with people. They try to turn everything into something political, which to me, this shouldn't be something that's political at all. You have the far left that's saying you have to get rid of these statues right here because these people were racist and blah blah blah, and if you don't like these statues, we're gonna spit in your face and you're racist. And then you have the alt-right and all these other people that's saying, oh, we're not going to let you tear these statues down because this is our history. Oh, blah, blah, blah. David Duke. Okay, but it's not erasing history. Like we had a statue of Robert E. Lee here in New Orleans where I am. Like, how did us taking down the statue of Robert E. Lee, which I really don't care about the statue one way or the other, but I'll get more into that. How did the statue of Robert E. Lee coming down in New Orleans affect a school in Washington up where you are and their ability to teach history of the Civil War? It doesn't. It doesn't at all. That the statue here had no effect or no impact over there at all. But the media, whether it be far left or far right or any kind of media, like I said, to me, this shouldn't be a partisan issue. This should strictly be something that's left to the city governments and the state governments. If they decide as a city or a state that they want to take this statue down because they don't feel it represents their history and their culture of that town, or say it's offending some people, then hell, take the statue down. It does not erase history. When you have, and I know I'm gonna go, then I'll let you go. Then like does when the Saddam regime was done away with and they pulled all the things down, man, I'll tell you, I haven't forgot about Saddam either. I'm pretty sure the books are not going to be changed at all either. So to say these statues are going to, by removing these statues, are going to do something with history or going to erase history, it's not accurate at all. And only in the United States, in our great country, well, where we will commemorate and build up statues for people that actually like killed other Americans. Like I'll stop right there before I go too long because I think I just talked for probably 10 minutes. But all right, go ahead.
Okay, because there's a lot there, and so
I know that's why I stopped.
Take them a little one at a time. I could go back to the end, which you repeated, the idea that we have statues of people who killed other people. All of the statues, other Americans. So many of the statues that still exist and will never be torn down. FDR is still a patron saint of the left. He killed a lot of Americans. He interned Japanese, and yet he is still a god to the left, right? I mean, he is the god of the Democratic Party. He is, and they had Obama on the cover of Time magazine, and it was his face and him, and then I think they just imposed his head on FDR, a famous FDR picture of him in the back of a limo. So Grant, there's a huge statue of General Grant in Washington, D.C. General Grant, of the 650,000 people that died in the U.S. War of Northern Aggression, approximately 400,000 of them were the Northerners. I mean, I think the North lost a lot more people than the South. Grant's entire strategy was just to grind him out. I mean, he was a terrible general. Nobody liked him until much later. I mean, the entire history of the Civil War was whitewashed. And so pretty much all those statues that exist are of people that killed other people, and most of them killed other Americans. We have a giant statue of Abraham Lincoln. He killed about 650,000 Americans in the war that he started. So, I mean, and by the way, it was vandalized by leftists, right? By Antifa type crowds. So I don't know if you saw that. I saw on the news somebody got in there and painted something on the side of the statue. So where does this end? If we're going to tear down statues, there was an article, I think it was in Slay, I forget where it was, and it was originally, and you can watch Mark Dice on this, and I'll get to Mark Dice again in a moment. But it said blow up Mount Rushmore. Should we blow up Mount Rushmore? Because after all, it has Jefferson and Washington on there, and they had slaves. So there you go. Let's blow up Mount Rushmore. Teddy Roosevelt was a wicked, disgusting individual. He talks about shooting in the first person. He went to war so he could kill somebody, and he shot him in the back as they were running away. Gutzman talks about that. Kevin Gutzman, Dr. Gutzman. And as far as tearing down statues, ISIS tears down a lot of statues. They blow up churches. They blow up all these things. And I don't see anybody saying, yeah, good for ISIS. Hey, why not? Why shouldn't they do that? Right. So I think the entire idea of tearing down statues. And second, or what point am I on? So, next.
Yeah, just say next.
So it is heritage of the South. So this is the history of the South. A lot of people complain about the Confederate flag. It's a Confederate battle flag. it is heritage of the South. And they still remember the heritage of the South. They don't remember. They're not focused on slavery. The Civil War was not at all about slavery. Nobody actually thinks it was. No historian thinks that it was about slavery. It was later after they started because they needed a reason. Just like was the Middle East War, the Iraq War that we're still in. Was that about taking out Saddam? No, it was about supposed weapons of mass destruction. But when they didn't find them, they had to blame somebody. Say, oh, Saddam's a bad guy. So that's the reason, right? So as far as you say, you made a kind of what I thought it was a comical statement, is that his history teachers should teach history. Well, guess what? They don't, right? Most history teachers are absolutely clueless on history. And they're just indoctrinated by other people that have no idea what they're talking about. So I mentioned Mark Dice. Watch Mark Dice when he goes out on the street. He does this little salute to jaywalking, which I love Jay Leno. And he does a little thing. He goes out and asks people when the War of 1812 was. Remember, Jay Leno used to do that, and people said 1943. When was the American Revolutionary War? A lot of people said 1942. That's when we started the American. Yeah, that's right. 1942 is when we declared independence from Great Britain. Or they don't even know that. They don't even know who we declared independence from. Okay. So, and the what was I going to say about that? The statues and David Duke. Who cares about David Duke? The only reason anybody knows who David Duke is, the media promotes him. The media loves to promote him because he sells their message. Yeah.
Hey, remember he ran for governor down here and senator. So in Louisiana,
did he win?
No.
What did he get? He got crushed.
I think he won senator. I don't remember. That was a while ago. But okay, I'll let you finish.
Okay, I'll just I say 1984. Down the memory hole, right? So we'll just erase history, and yeah, it will erase history. These people, they did exist. They do have relevance, but when we're getting in here and we're getting rid of their statues, I predict that within a decade, we will start taking them out of the textbooks. Like, these people did not exist. They are not worthy of learning about. That is the point. That is what people are going to say. 1984, the book, right? People who don't remember their history are doomed to repeat it. So we'll get it. We'll get out the Civil War or something else, but I will just point out, have an unrealistic view of history. Well, yes, I think people that are tearing them down don't even know what history is. They don't have any idea of history before last year. Okay, that's an absolute fact. You know what I will say, that is an absolute. Okay, they don't know anything about history. And two, they've never looked at the situation objectively. Well, I would say people that are tearing them down have never looked at it objectively. I've never lived in the South. I have been there. I enjoyed it. I liked it. I like the kind of this way of life down there. And if it was just me, not to say that I would ever, want that. Love my wife dearly, but I would love to go to Tennessee or something like that. So, okay. So go ahead.
All right. So let me go through all this. All right. So, man, you gave me probably about as much stuff to go through as I gave you.
Yeah, so I kind of like the little bit at a time, little piece at a time.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about, you said
hot out here.
That kind of taking down some of the statues, that it will erase history. Let me say this. I have never, ever, ever, ever seen a statue of Adolf Hitler. However, that is a pretty significant part of history that I don't think, whether it's in a statue or not, will ever be taken away. So I would say
that what people think of Hitler is completely washed from the history books. Like, what people know about him. So he was a Nazi. People don't really know anything about him.
Okay, so
he was a National Socialist, right? He was a socialist. So people think he's some right winger now. Nazis are on the right wing. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, history.
That's kind of my point. Mm-hmm.
History is all jacked up, and what my
those
point
history
is,
teachers you praised earlier, that's their fault.
But I agree with you on that. But it's not our history, and our history lessons and our heritage we should not depend on statues for that, because a statue does nothing. Like, okay, so my point, trying to come back to all this. So first, let me say this. So if you want to debate me about the Civil War not being about slavery, we could debate that in a whole nother debate. Actually, I've already did that debate, and I actually won that one because there are certain things you have to look at. One, when you look at the articles of secession from each state that seceded, slavery was the number one thing brought up. Then when you look at the Constitution, the Constitution for the Confederacy, Article 4, Section 2 and 3, both of them basically said that if you were going to be part of the Confederacy, the Confederate country or whatever they call themselves, that one, you had to have slavery. You couldn't stop slavery. And the other point was that at no point could you, as long as you were part of that nation, you could not stop owning slaves. It was going to be a slave country, and that's it. You did not have a choice on whether or not you were actually going to own slaves or not. So
that's not what it. I mean, first of all, they outlawed, just like the U.S. Constitution said, after 1811, they were going to disallow the import of slaves as a way to eventually get over it. I mean, everybody knew that it was going to end. Slavery is not an economically viable policy. But the idea that you had to own slaves, no, that was not what it said. It said they would be allowable. Correct?
No. Okay.
They did not. Okay. I mean, come on. Well, let me also point out that about 10% of the slave owners were themselves black, right? Dinesh D'Souza does an interesting thing on this as well, where he talks about the fact that the Democratic Party back then said if you had one drop of black blood, you were black, right? One drop of African blood, you were called quote unquote black. Even the Nazis said, whoa, too racist for us, right? Hitler said, whoa, the Democratic Party, too racist for us. Okay. They said you had to have 3 Jewish grandmothers, and then they had or grandparents, and then they had some other qualifications. So that's kind of a side story,
okay.
But so basically we're going to disagree on that. We can maybe get into that later.
We can disagree on what caused a civil war, but coming back to current times where we are right now with the unrealistic view of history and not looking at the situation objectively. Okay, so what I want to say is this. All right, let's talk about Nathan Bedford Forrest, like one of the awesome dudes that all the far right, the alt-right were like all up in arms. No, let's not take any of these statues down. This guy was so great. Well, okay. Looking at the whole story of this guy, first of all, he sharpened his sword extra sharp just so he could like cut people. Then when he'd catch like slaves trying to escape, he'd take them, skin them alive, and then take their skin and nail it on the wall of a barn to show that in case you're trying to do this, this is what's going to happen to you. Not to mention that, but he would like cut people in half, like if they were white and they were trying to if they were abolitionists trying to help free slaves, he'd cut them in half. And it's like, this is this the heritage that like other people are like, they're trying to take away our heritage? That's the heritage that we want to keep up with? I'm not sure that's right. And like I said, the thing is, by just looking at a statue and you're seeing the statue of this guy, yeah, you're thinking, oh, this guy, the Civil War was about us standing up for whatever the other reason for people trying to say this is the Civil War happened. It's unrealistic. That's not how history was. These people, like I said, just giving the one example of the Forrest guy, dude, he killed all kind of people and he took great pleasure in like skinning black people. It's like, man, only in America, like if this may be a far example, but if somebody like raped my wife or somebody killed my daughter or something like that, or somebody killed my mom, I would not want you to put a statue of it in your neighbor's yard. Not to mention most of these statues, there are many times where these statues are taken down and other organizations say, okay, bring those statues to us. That is perfectly fine. But the alt-right or the far right people, they never dwell on that. And you can say, like I said, there's on the far left and the far right, there are no real like people that are really trying to help this cause at all. Everybody wants to just cause a war and stuff like that. But these statues are perfectly able to get put into these other little historical, like say the alt-right wants to go ahead and sponsor all these statues there. There's no problem with that. But like I said, it's unrealistic to say that these people were heroes and great heritages and stuff like that just based off of statues. And that's the unrealistic view that we're giving people and our children as we just leave these statues there and say these people are heroes. And when I say that it's not looked at the situation objectively, I'm saying, man, though, for a lot of black people, you can say, hey, like me being one black person, I can say that a statue there really has no effect on my day-to-day at all. Like the statue of Robert E. Lee that was here, I think I probably saw it once my whole life because I didn't that part of the city had too much traffic, so I went through other areas. However, I am able to be objective enough to say that there probably are some people who it is a traumatic experience. Like I said, if somebody had a statue of somebody who raped your mom or raped your grandmother and it was across the street, you wouldn't just say, you know what? It's part of history. Leave that statue up. Just get over it.
Okay, well, I have to say something on that.
All right, go ahead.
You don't have a right to be freedom from trauma, right? You don't have a right to freedom from trauma. So something offends you, so what? Who cares? And as far as Robert E. Lee, he didn't even own any slaves. He inherited some from his wife. He set them free. He was anti-slavery. Okay, now most people that are out there protesting, they tore his statue down. Again, they don't have any idea who Robert E. Lee is. They were just told, slave owner, Confederate. Oh, let's go tear it down. They whipped into a frenzy. They're all mindless drones. I mean, that's just the public today. I would say some statues, maybe we could, but we can't just say, oh, if you had any connection to the Confederacy, we have to tear your statue down. I think it's ridiculous.
I agree.
That's what they're doing. Right? If any connection to slavery at all, they're going to tear them down. Now, said rape your wife, etc., things like that. There is no one alive who was ever a slave or ever knew a slave. There is no one alive who owns a slave that is in the United States. Sorry, they still have slaves in Africa and the Middle East. But, I would also point out that it was Africans, tribal leaders that sold each other to the slave traders, right? So we're not talking about like
I would say that is
slavery.
That is 100% correct. There are Africans who sold, like tribal people who sold the slaves to the United States. Yes. And we have 0 statues of those Africans here in the United States.
But you know what? People don't even know that. Okay. That's what kind of my point. People don't recognize that. Right. So people think that slavery began and ended in the United States. That is the limit of their knowledge. Right. The fact is slavery goes back to almost, just outside the Garden of Eden. And it exists today in the Middle East and in Africa and Asia. It was only ended in the West. It was ended in Great Britain in approximately 1823, and it was ended in the United States, which you could say approximately 1965, right? The Lincoln's famous proclamation to end slavery didn't do anything. It was meaningless. It meant nothing. It was just a speech, famous speech, but it didn't have any power because he didn't control the South, right? So, there were a lot of people that were adamantly against slavery that fought for the South. So it was not about slavery. People didn't fight for the South. So now think about this. Most farmers in the South did not own slaves. Only a few owned slaves. They were the rich plantation owners. And yet most people in the South did fight for the Civil War. So it wasn't about slavery. Does it really make any sense that you're going to sacrifice your life, your wealth, your entire history so that somebody down the street that you once saw riding in a carriage can own a few people? Doesn't make any sense. Second, as far as slaves go, slavery, they consider these people property. So I don't know if we have time to get into what the Civil War really did and the problems we have with race today and why we have them and why England doesn't have them. It was because of the Civil War, right? The way that so if you're a slave owner, you consider a slave. Now, let me go out on a limb here. I'm against slavery, right? Nobody in my family ever owned slaves. So nobody in my family was a slave that I know of, right? My family comes from Russia, and I'm mostly got a lot of Native American in me, right? So QallOut, Delaware, all that. Okay, so I could say, give me my land back, Terrence. Just kidding.
Hey, only if I can ask for my reparations.
Well, so I did. Thank you for bringing that up because I didn't want to just bring it up, but how do you pay reparations? Right?
Dude,
I mean, it's not possible.
I don't.
Can you prove that you were a descendant of a slave?
I was about to say, hold on.
And who are you going to take money? No, I know. I just wanted to point that out, right? So we mentioned the slave traders in Africa. I just want you to imagine, okay? So you've got blacks in the United States that, on a worldwide scale, are extremely wealthy. Okay, so if you make $35,000 a year, you are the 1% in the world. Okay, so the average African American, so-called, is, I think they make about 35,000. So the median income, so half of blacks in America are in the 1% of the world. Now, what you're going to do is you want to pay reparations, where we're going to have to go to Africa and we're going to have to find these people that live on $2 a day, and we're going to take one of them and we're going to give it to that guy in New Jersey, in Newark, who makes $40,000 a year. Does that seem right to you? Does that seem fair? No, it doesn't seem fair to me, right? Because after all, but that's what you would have to do. So I did want to just again go back to the if we could go back to the topic,
Yes,
if that's okay. So again, I say Robert E. owned no slaves. A lot of these statues they're tearing down really had nothing to do with slavery. They were anti-slaves. They owned no slaves. What was I going to say about that? Something else you brought up. Anyways, which statue should we tear down though? There's an Albert Pike statue in Washington D.C. That guy was he was a Luciferian. He openly worshipped Lucifer. I mean, he wrote the Morals and Dogma. He was a 33rd degree Mason. He was the top Mason. They've got statues of him, busts, library to him, all kinds of things. And he was a slave owner, Confederate general, all that. So.
Oh, was that it? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So what I was going to say is this. All right. Do we have, this may be a rather weird thing to say, do we have any evidence or any proof of how failure to keep a statue of someone or something will fail to keep it known about in our society? Because right now we can go talk about history all the way back to a fellow young earth creationist. We can go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. And yet I've never seen a statue of Adam or Eve once. I don't think there really are any, or probably some. I'm not going to go start. I'm not going to start bashing liberals, but some ACL. I
say it's true, because the Supreme Court took the 10 Commandments out of the schools, and they took it out because they said people will look at the 10 Commandments, and when they look at them, they will ponder on them, and when they ponder on them, they might just follow them, right? So the fact that the 10 Commandments are actually there, and they've done studies, and they've said when people sign an agreement to be honest, they are more honest. So just having things there does make people ponder the history of that thing, and I would say of that person as well.
But even without that, like, we could talk about,
because nobody knows who Adam and Eve are. Okay, so
we can talk about the body of Jesus that was missing and is still missing, and there's no statues to it yet. That history, you and I both could speak on that history to no end. So it's a little bit of a stretch to say, if we don't have this statue of this guy in Podunk, Mississippi, then all of a sudden the history is going to be lost. The heritage is going to be lost. The fact is, the Civil War was a major thing. It is the only, as of today, it is the only civil war that we've had in this country. And it's a little bit of exaggeration to say. I'm sorry, say that one more time.
It's the only war we've had on American soil.
Yeah, as of today, because
except Pearl Harbor, but yeah,
I was say maybe
that wasn't the United States at the time.
Maybe next year it may be the first, not the only, but who knows? And then I want to bring up on the conservative side of me is this: we talk about abortion, and the main thing about abortion is, like, one of my things for being anti-abortion is I don't want my tax dollars going to pay for somebody else's abortion, somebody else's medical anything. And that's some people they have every right to say they don't want their tax dollars going to the upkeep of someone who was responsible for murdering other thousands of Americans, or somebody who fought for the Confederacy. You have that right. So if they don't want their tax dollars to go to that, like I said, these are city monuments. These are things that the city pays for to do upkeep for. These are things that these tax dollars for these people who probably are anti this guy is evil, and they still have to pay for it. So like I said, there's in
Okay, I understand what you're saying there as far as taxes paying for these monuments, but taxes pay for all the monuments, right? All the parks. And there are a lot of people that with monuments that I think we would say are reprehensible, but the general public loves, right? So FDR has his own statue in Washington, D.C. We talk about, statues and monuments to the wars. Every war has a monument. We could say, well, we were against these wars because they killed a lot of people. So I just don't think that to say these statues are already there, right? So it's not like anything's being paid to keep them up or anything. Now there is because people are threatening them. So, we have to pay money to protect them. They should be protected. They are, again, I will go back. They are history. And just because somebody doesn't like them doesn't mean you should tear them down. So as far as that, there's there's monuments to Planned Parenthood. If you want to talk about,
are there really statues of Planned Parenthood? Are you
there is one to Margaret Sanger, I believe. I forget. I think it's in D.C. or something. But you could say monuments to the mass death cult that they have, and they're in every town and every city and all over, right? The PPs. And you want to talk about a completely racist organization. Planned Parenthood was adopted and created to kill the black weeds. That's what Sanger called them. She wanted to rid us of the black race, right? So I think that the fact that people worship her, that's pretty repulsive, right? So let me say I just disagree with her basic statement there. Okay, so I don't, so I think Planned Parenthood is an atrocious. It's an absolute atrocity.
Yes,
and the fact that she's still beloved and worshipped. I mean, literally, I think they worship her. Okay, on a separate. Let me separate that. Let's pause. Okay. Okay. So now, because I want to talk about your mention of the statue of Jesus, and there are statues of Jesus and Mary in the Catholic Church.
But you know what?
In the Catholic Church, there are paintings and things like that. Okay. There are statues of Mary. They worship Mary, and
I am not going to let you take it, because if you and I started a debate on Catholicism, you and I would would go all day on that.
Well, let me say, are you Catholic?
No, I'm not.
So I don't think we're going to debate anything on that then. So I think you agree with me, right? So that I think the Catholic Church is problematic. We'll just leave it at that. But they do have statues of all these things, right? They worship Mary, and the fact they have a statue there because they venerate her, but it also reminds them of her, right? John Paul prayed to her, and he bowed and worshipped at her statue. In John Paul II, he said that Mary saved him when he got shot back in the 70s, I think it was. So, anyways, and all I was saying there is that there are statues to these people. So. Okay. And what it does is pictures and statues and paintings and things remind us of who these people are. They help us to remember them. So I am predicting that these people will be erased from the history books. Now, I've predicted a lot of things, and at the time, everybody thought, oh my God, you're crazy, right? So we talk about, same-sex marriage, and I said it's going to be forced on pastors and other people, and oh, you're crazy, they'll never do that. Well, hey, guess what? They are. So there's a lot of things. These things don't happen in vacuums, right? Now, the problem, you could talk about liberals, they kind of focus on one little tiny issue at a time, and they can't expand their minds to how this might apply to other areas. But so anyways, I'll go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so what notes I was taking while you're doing it, I just want to say this, okay? Statues, just a statue of anyone, is an inaccurate representation of and I'm talking about these Civil War statues. They are inaccurate representation of these people and their lives and what they did. These people are, some of them, as I said in my opening statements, that, it is the responsibility of teachers and parents and stuff like that to let these kids know what happened with the Civil War and stuff like that. Because when you just have some statue up and you just have some old guy saying, oh, this is our heritage, but it's like, what heritage I can ask, and I know you being a northerner, you being a Yankee, you probably don't know this. I don't know, as
I
somebody
love the South.
yeah, as somebody that's born and raised in Louisiana, in New Orleans, down here, I'm not sure what heritage they're talking about that we're losing by removing these statues. Removing the statue of Robert E. Lee it has absolutely no effect on our heritage. You know what? Hey, the same way New Orleans was when the statue was up that day is the same day it was the next day after that. But and that's what I mean by they have an unrealistic view of history, and you agree with me on that. Is the problem is a lot of these people have no idea what the history of any of these people are. Like going back to when you brought up FDR or anybody else, like I said, very few people actually know who these people were, because our history at school has gotten even worse than it should be. But it can't be statues that's left to do this. And when I say they have never really looked at the situation objectively, you have to look at it as, okay, while you're talking about your heritage here and you're saying these statues, by taking down these statues, this is going to erase our heritage right here. But also you have to look at the heritage on the other side of that. Like I said, you have to look at just the general that I brought up. This guy killed and filleted and nailed skin of people, black people on walls when they were trying to escape. Should a person that's offended by that have to walk down the street every single day and see that and be reminded of, man, this guy killed everybody who looks like me? That's unfair thing. Like I said, when it could perfectly be, especially when it's that person that's using their tax dollars at the job they're working while they're probably walking by that statue, they probably are paying for that statue to upkeep. It is more feasible for anybody who feels that these are tearing down their history or trying to erase their history. Okay, man, you know what? Talk to the city, get that statue put in your front yard, and then it's on your private property and nobody can tell you anything.
And I'm sure people would like to do that, but that's not what they want. They want to tear the statue down. And if you see what they did to it when they tore it down, they started kicking it and hitting it. And again, these are just mind-washed people, right? They're completely brainwashed drones. But the idea of tearing down the statue, why is ISIS blowing up these monasteries and these various churches? It's because they want to erase the memory of that from ever existing. My friend went to Ukraine and he lived there for a while, and he went to a town and he was talking to somebody and he said, hey, there used to be a lot of Jews here in this town. And the people there said, no, really not. There were never very many here, ever any here. And historically they were, but the fact that the communists come in and they killed any that they could find and then they just erased them from history means that people today don't know the history of their own town, right? They don't know that people were there. And the entire point of tearing these statues down is to erase them from the history books, to erase their memory from people's minds. And so if you erase their memory, you totally erase the entire, well, we've already washed the Civil War, the facts of what happened during the Civil War and what the South actually believed. But General Lee was the top general in the South, and people think he was some advocate for slavery and he fought because he wanted to keep slaves. But again, I point out that people don't know he never actually owned any. He inherited from his wife. He let them go. He freed them. So, and people don't know that blacks owned slaves. There were a lot of blacks in the South that actually owned slaves. It wasn't. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. It's much more complicated than what people think. And I think with having these statues here, when people walk by and they're offended, maybe hopefully they would think about it. Don't just be offended by it. I was talking to somebody today. It was a famous video that's going around of a guy jogger on the street, and he pushed a woman that was in front of him, and she fell in front of a bus. And I said, boy, as a runner, I've had people just cluelessly step in front of me, and I've given them a little shove. But I was joking. I was like, who hasn't considered that, right? Just pushing somebody that's stepping in your way, and the person, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. You think you want to push people in front of buses? I'm like, no, but that's typical of their kind. And the disparagement of me as a Yankee is just more than I can take. I am a Yankee fan, but I'm in the Northwest, so there was no Northwest state. There were no states back then. So
yep.
We were the territories.
So and
Oregon territories.
this is the thing. So having these statues has no way ensured the proper history or story has been told about these guys. So it's hard to believe that tearing down the statues is going to have some great big impact on their history. Uh, the problem is with the history and that's being taught in schools. It's not these statues. That's it is just a scapegoat. Like I said, I think it's the far left and the far right who are doing this, and the 80% of the people that are in between these two factions are almost like just playing partisans. Like, you know what, these people are messed up, and I'm a Democrat, so I should play along with them. Or, you know what, I'm on the right, so yep, I should be upset with these people over here. And it's like I said, it's crazy because the people this heritage, this false heritage that people have, that the South was all about states' rights and this was about states' rights. No, that's not the case, because if it was about states' rights, then it wouldn't have been outlined so effectively in the secession documents and the Constitution of the Confederacy that you had to own slaves to order to be a state inside the Confederacy. Yes, it does. It does.
You didn't have to own them. You must allow them.
No, the state.
So let me say centralization versus states' rights. The Civil War is the cause. That is the focal point of the problems we have today with centralized power and the federal government being as big as it is. Before that, you had states' rights. Robert E. Lee said, "I am a Virginian first, and a citizen of the United States second." So before the Civil War, you had states. You were a member of a state. Now you're a member of the United States, and you have to bow the knee to the federal government. Centralization versus states' rights was one of the top issues. Number one, tariff. They were really destroying the South with the tariff. Number two, centralization versus states' rights, founded on a constitutional federal republic. And South Carolina threatened to secede before that, many years before that. And in fact, when John Adams created his anti-American, anti-rights, the Sedition, Alien and Sedition Act in 18 something, Virginia threatened to secede. So states have a right to secede. And in fact, when they got together in the Constitutional Convention, they said, look, why would we sign this? And they said, people like Hamilton, traitors like Hamilton said, no, don't worry about it. If you don't like it, you can get out at any time. South said, oh yeah, remember that promise he made to us? Here it is. So it wasn't about slavery. Now to get some of the rich plantation owners, because again, there were a few people that had a lot of money in plantation, to get them on board, they had to give them that promise. But you know what? To form the United States, they had to do the same thing. So they also had the heritage. The South was had a stronger Christian heritage, and you had the Northern secular humanists. So I think we should be together on that. Cultural differences, and this is history, right? So history in the South versus history in the North, I'm gonna bet is pretty different, especially on these things. And part of it is, if you remember who these people are, the North doesn't know who they are. They just know they're evil, wicked people. That the things you said about Nathan Bedford Forrest, I'm sure those are what people think of Robert E. Lee. He probably walked around with 2 swords, killing people 3 at a time. If you ask people, I'm sure that's what they believe. Control of Western territories, Northern industrialization, really stealing the resources from the South, slandering the South in newspapers, New England's attempt to investigate massive slave rebellions in the South. And number 9, slavery. That was a small, minor issue, but the North didn't care about slaves. They sent them back. So Northern aggression against Southern states. So, those are just 10 issues. I think I forget who this was, but there's a New York Times article that even gives these as the same thing. So it really was about states' rights. I mean, that was a central issue. So we got a minute left.
States' rights to own slaves. Okay, with that being said, I just want to say, so just going back, just Section 4, at least Article 4, Section 2 and 3 of the Constitution for the Confederate States. It says that in order to be
let me say, we can get to that later, but we only have a minute left, and so if you want to address the topic mainly.
Okay, so having an unrealistic view of history and having never looked at the situation objectively, I think I actually have shown those because, for one, like I said, the statues, they actually don't really teach the history of these people at all. And there's no evidence of like taking down a statue. Is it going to erase the history or erase the heritage? Because most of this stuff is being, this false stuff is being taught by that. Just like having these statues there, haven't taught them the right history, tearing them down is not going to erase the history. And when I say have never really looked at a situation objectively, I'm only talking about the people that are not being sensitive, that somebody may actually be offended by knowing that this guy was a mass murderer. Okay, but I'll stop.
Okay, so I get 10 seconds. So thanks. I think tearing down the statues, the entire point of tearing them down is to erase history. That's why ISIS tears them down. The heritage of the South, that's what these are. These history, and I think